Imagine a planet that no longer belongs to any sun, no sunrise, no sunset, no warm horizon, no morning at all. Just a world, still real, still turning, still carrying mountains, ice, rock, maybe even buried oceans, but drifting through the dark, alone. Tonight, we begin with one of the strangest ideas in astronomy, a rogue planet, a world that has slipped free from its star, or perhaps never truly belonged to one, and now moves through interstellar space, where there is no day, only distance. And the reason this matters is that rogue planets are not just a beautiful science fiction image. They appear to be real, not rare fantasies, not poetic inventions, but actual worlds that may exist in astonishing numbers, which means the universe may contain not only bright systems, not only suns and their families, but countless hidden planets, moving silently between the stars. Cold worlds, dark worlds, worlds almost no one would ever see. And yet, they may be everywhere. That is the first strange turn in this story. When most people picture the universe, they imagine light first. Stars, galaxies, nebulae, burning centers, visible things. But some of the most haunting objects in the cosmos may be the ones that do not shine. The ones that simply continue, unlit, unannounced, almost invisible. There is something deeply unsettling about that, and also something peaceful. Because a rogue planet is not dramatic in the ordinary way. It does not need to explode. It does not need to collide. It does not need to tear itself apart. Sometimes, a planet becomes extraordinary through silence, through separation, through the simple fact that it keeps going, after losing the light that once defined it. That is what makes this such a powerful first journey for gentle science. Because this is not just a story about astronomy, it is a story about a hidden world, a real world, made stranger by the absence of something we take for granted, the sun. Here on Earth, light organizes almost everything. Light touches the ocean and wakes it. Light warms stone. Light moves the air. Light tells plants when to open. Light tells bodies when to rise. Light creates morning, even before we are fully awake enough to notice it. We do not usually think of sunlight as structure, but it is. It shapes time, rhythm, temperature, weather, life. Now imagine removing that structure. Not for one night, not for one winter, not after a storm, not during an eclipse, but completely. Imagine a world where the sun does not return tomorrow, or next week, or in 1,000 years. A world where there is no dawn waiting beyond the horizon, because there is no dawn anymore. That is the emotional center of a rogue planet. A place where darkness is no longer an event. It is the condition of existence. And yet, that darkness is not empty. That is the second strange turn in this story. Because when people first hear the phrase, world with no sun, they often imagine only death, a frozen stone, a dead sphere, a useless object disappearing into nothing. But the truth may be much more interesting than that. A planet can lose its star and still remain a planet. It still has mass, gravity, layers, history, chemistry. It may still have an atmosphere for a time. It may still hold internal heat. It may still protect deep hidden pockets of liquid water beneath vast fields of ice. A sunless world may be harsher, quieter, colder, but not necessarily meaningless, not necessarily finished. And that is where curiosity begins to replace fear. Because once you understand that a rogue planet is not merely a ruined planet, the whole subject changes. this is no longer just a story about loss. It becomes a story about what remains, what survives, what transforms, what continues in the dark. Some rogue planets may have started in normal planetary systems. Young systems are chaotic places, full of gravitational arguments. Large worlds pull on smaller ones. Orbits cross. Distances shift. Balance breaks. And every now and then, a planet is not destroyed, but removed, thrown outward, pushed so far from its star that it never comes back. Not shattered, not burned, just exiled. There is something almost mythic in that image. A world cast out of its own solar system. A place that once knew a repeating sky, now sent into a darkness with no seasons, no warm noon, no evening that leads to morning. Other rogue planets may have formed in a different way, not as proper members of tidy solar families, but in lonely regions of gas and dust, where matter gathered into something planet-like, without ever settling into the bright order of a star-bound orbit. So some were lost, and some may have begun alone, but whichever path they followed, they arrive at the same haunting destination, a world with no sun. And if you pause on that image for long enough, you start to feel why rogue planets are so memorable. They are scientifically fascinating, yes, but they also press on something deeper. They make the universe feel larger, darker, more emotionally strange, because they suggest that not every world belongs to a glowing center. Some worlds wander. Some worlds are not held in place by light. Some worlds move through a region of space so cold and so wide that every ordinary human idea of home begins to fall apart. That is not an easy thing for the mind to hold. We are used to centered systems. We are used to circles, routine, return. We are used to the idea that somewhere nearby there is a sun, and rogue planets quietly undo that expectation. They tell us that a world can be real, solid, ancient, layered with history, and still have no dawn. That perhaps there are mountains out there that have not seen light in unimaginable spans of time. Frozen plains that have known only starlight. Subsurface oceans sealed beneath ice so thick that the world above them has long forgotten warmth. Maybe even skies more beautiful than ours, in their own severe way. Because if you could stand on the surface of a rogue planet, and if you could survive the cold, the night sky might be one of the clearest imaginable. No nearby sun to wash it out. No daylight. No twilight. No bright atmosphere scattering light across the heavens. Only stars. Sharp, ancient, uninterrupted. The Milky Way might stretch across the darkness with an intensity almost impossible to imagine from Earth. A frozen river of distant suns. And beneath it, a planet that has none of its own. That contrast is extraordinary. A sky full of stars, and no sunrise among them. A universe overflowing with light, and one world that no longer receives it. This is why rogue planets feel like the perfect beginning for this new phase of the channel, because they sit exactly at the meeting point of wonder and stillness. They are big enough to feel cosmic, strange enough to feel unforgettable, and quiet enough to be told softly. No panic, no noise, no rushing, just a hidden world and the long, slow consequences of losing a sun. In the parts ahead, we will go deeper. We will ask how planets are thrown out of solar systems, what happens to their skies, what happens to their surfaces, whether oceans can survive under ice, and whether life, in some deep and altered form, could still continue there. But before we go further, stay for one more moment with the image itself. A planet, without morning. A horizon that never brightens. a world still moving through the galaxy, long after the light that once defined it is gone. Not destroyed, not impossible, just hidden. And somewhere in the dark beyond our own familiar system, such worlds may be drifting right now. Cold, silent, and very real. But how does a planet become alone? How does a world go from orbit to exile? Because a rogue planet does not begin in darkness. It begins inside a system. A star at the center, worlds circling around it, gravity holding everything in a fragile pattern of return. From far away, a solar system can look calm, balanced, almost permanent. But young planetary systems are not peaceful places. They are crowded, restless, unfinished. Worlds are still forming, gas is still shifting, orbits are still changing. And gravity, quiet as it seems, can be merciless over time. Not merciless in sound, not in fire, not in violence you could hear, but in consequence. Because gravity does not need to break a planet, to take everything familiar from it. It only needs to keep pulling, again, and again, and again. That is one of the strangest truths in astronomy. A planet can be lost without being destroyed. It can leave its star without exploding. It can be removed from the warm architecture of a solar system by motion alone. Imagine a young system in its early chaos, a bright young star, new planets still settling, giant worlds growing heavy with gas, smaller worlds trying to hold their place. Nothing is fully stable yet, and the largest planets often control the story, because once a world becomes massive enough, its gravity begins to disturb everything nearby. It bends paths, reshapes distances, creates resonances, and slowly weakens the delicate balance other planets depend on. At first, nothing may seem dramatic. A planet circles its star, returns, circles again. Years pass, then centuries, then thousands of years. But instability does not always arrive like a disaster. Sometimes it builds in silence. A small change in distance, a repeated gravitational tug, an orbit stretched just a little too far, and then one close encounter, one giant planet passing near enough to redirect another world. Not a collision, not an explosion, a slingshot, a world suddenly moving too fast or at too sharp an angle to remain where it once belonged. That is one possible birth of a rogue planet, not through destruction, through expulsion, through the cold mathematics of gravity. There is something almost severe about that. Nothing chooses to cast the planet out. There is no anger in the system, no intention, no warning, only outcome. Only a final change in speed and a path that no longer curves back toward the star. And that moment matters more than it first appears, because to orbit a star is to live inside repetition. You return to light, return to warmth, return to the energy that shapes your sky, your atmosphere, your climate, your surface. A rogue planet loses more than position. It loses recurrence. It loses the cycle itself. That is why exile is the right word. The planet is not merely far away. It has been removed from the rhythm that made it what it was. At first, the change might not look dramatic from the surface. If there were oceans, they would not freeze in a single instant. If there were winds, they would not stop all at once. Stone would still hold warmth. Air would still move. Clouds might still drift. The world would carry, for a little while, the fading memory of a normal sky. But the transformation would already have begun. Because distance from a star is not just less light. At some point, it becomes the end of an entire system of causes. Sunlight weakens, surface energy falls, temperature gradients soften, weather loses its engine. The planet begins to cross into another kind of existence, all because the orbit has failed, all because gravity, the same force that builds systems, can also undo them. That is another hard and beautiful truth. The universe does not divide neatly into creation and destruction. Very often, it uses the same laws for both. The same pull that gathers worlds into order can scatter them into darkness. The same force that creates a family of planets can separate one forever. And this may not be rare. Young systems across the galaxy may have gone through similar instability. Giant planets shifting, smaller worlds displaced, whole architectures rearranged, which means rogue planets may be common, not because the universe is unusually cruel, but because instability is part of how planetary systems grow. A world does not need extraordinary bad luck, only a crowded beginning, only massive neighbors, only time. And time, in astronomy, is generous with chances. Millions of years, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. More than enough time for tiny orbital differences to become irreversible. If you imagine that from the surface of the planet itself, it becomes even more haunting. Perhaps there was once a sun in the sky, steady enough to shape the horizon. Perhaps there were long seasons, warming cycles, familiar patterns of light. And then, over ages too long for any one moment to reveal, the relationship began to fail. The orbit widened, or shifted, or broke. The star grew smaller, the warmth weakened, and eventually, the planet crossed the invisible line between belonging and departure. That line may be one of the quietest tragedies in astronomy, because nothing has to explode. A world can lose its home through geometry, through momentum, through the patient arithmetic of gravity. There is also another possibility. Some free-floating worlds may not have been ejected at all. Some may have formed alone, in dark regions of gas and dust, too small to ignite as stars, but large enough to become planet-like objects. These worlds would not be exiles. They would be loners from the beginning, born without sunrise, born without orbit. That possibility makes the universe stranger still, because now there are two kinds of darkness: worlds that lost the light, and worlds that never had it. But tonight, the exiled world remains the more haunting image. A planet that once had a center, and no longer does. A world still carrying rock, metal, gravity, buried heat, and ancient history, but no longer carrying a morning. That is the mechanical beginning of a rogue planet, not a dramatic ending. A long destabilization, a close encounter, a final acceleration, and then release. In the next part, we will stay with the planet after the ejection. We will look up from its surface, into a sky without sunrise, and we will begin to see why a world with no sun may still be one of the most beautiful places in the universe. Now imagine that the ejection is over. The star is gone. The orbit is gone. And the planet is no longer falling around anything bright. It is still moving, still real, still carrying its own weight through the galaxy. But now, for the first time, it belongs fully to the dark. This is where the sky changes, and the change is almost impossible to compare to anything on Earth, because night, as we know it, is temporary. Even at its deepest, even in the quietest hour before dawn, some part of the world already knows the sun will return. A rogue planet has no such promise. Its darkness is not a pause. It is the condition of existence, not an interruption of light, but the absence of it. And that changes the meaning of the sky. On Earth, The sky is always part memory and part expectation. Day fades into evening. Evening deepens into night. Night carries the hidden approach of morning. There is a rhythm to darkness here, a movement through it. But on a rogue planet, there is no movement toward dawn, no horizon slowly preparing to brighten, no faint promise behind distant mountains, no pale blue returning to the edge of the world, only a long, unbroken, cosmic midnight. That is difficult to imagine at first, because the human mind keeps trying to insert a sunrise. It wants to believe the darkness is waiting for something, that if you stay long enough, some distant line will soften, some cold edge of land will glow, some forgotten morning will begin again. But it will not. And once that becomes real in your mind, the planet feels different. Not dead, not empty, just separated from the cycle we take for granted. If you stood on its surface, and if somehow you could survive the cold, the first thing you might notice would be the clarity. No daylight, no twilight, no bright nearby sun scattering light through the sky. Only stars, sharp stars, ancient stars, uncountable stars. The Milky Way might stretch overhead with a brightness almost painful in its beauty, a frozen river of distant suns, dense bands of dust, crowded star fields, light gathered into structures so bright and deep they would no longer feel decorative. They would feel physical, like part of the terrain of the universe itself. On Earth, even the best night sky is softened by atmosphere, by moisture, by the memory of day. But here, with no sunrise ever approaching, the darkness might feel cleaner, harder, more absolute. And in that absolute darkness, the stars would not necessarily feel warm. They might feel old, remote, almost geological. Not tiny points of comfort, but evidence of vast time. The sky of a rogue planet might be one of the clearest in existence, and also one of the loneliest, because all that visible light would belong to somewhere else. You would stand beneath a sky overflowing with suns, and have none. That contrast is part of what makes rogue planets so haunting. A universe full of fire, and one world cut off from it. There would be no dawn chorus of color, no gold at the horizon, no brightening cloud edges, no long evening shadows slowly reversing into morning. Mountains would remain in darkness. Frozen plains would remain in darkness. Craters, ice fields, stone ridges, silent valleys, all held under the same endless sky. If the planet had an atmosphere, the sky might not look entirely black. In some places, a very thick atmosphere could scatter faint light in strange ways. It might glow weakly with internal haze, or reflect the distant brightness of the Milky Way just enough to soften the darkness. But it would still be nothing like day, nothing like dawn, only a dimmer version of permanent night. And if the atmosphere were thin, or mostly gone, the stars might feel even closer. Not truly close, of course, but visually close, as if the darkness had removed every layer between the surface and the wider cosmos. You might feel less as though you were standing under a sky, and more as though you were standing directly inside space. That feeling matters, because a normal planetary sky protects the mind. It gives a sense of enclosure. It tells you, even in darkness, that you belong to a world with air, weather, return. As Rogue Planet might not offer that emotional shelter, its sky could feel too deep, too open, too final. And yet, for the same reason, it might also be overwhelmingly beautiful. Not beautiful in the cheerful sense, not welcoming, not kind, but severe, clean, and unforgettable. There may be moments on such a world, if moments still feel like the right word, when the sky appears almost motionless, no sunrise to divide time, no daylight to reset attention, just stars, slowly shifting by degrees too small to feel, the galaxy turning with immense patience overhead, the darkness staying whole. You could imagine standing there for what feels like hours, watching the same constellations remain, watching the Milky Way hold its shape, watching nothing brighten, and then understanding, with a kind of quiet shock, this is not night. This is the sky now. That realization may be one of the deepest psychological differences. On Earth, darkness implies return. On a rogue planet, darkness becomes geography. It is part of the structure of the place, part of the meaning of standing there. And still, that does not make the world featureless. Because even without a sun, there may be other lights, faint ones, strange ones. If the planet has internal heat and a thick atmosphere, there might be weak infrared glow at the horizon, invisible to human eyes, but present in the physics of the world. If charged particles interact with a remaining magnetic field, there may be auroras, soft curtains of color, perhaps rare, perhaps dim, perhaps the only large moving lights the sky ever sees. Imagine that. A world with no sunrise, and yet now and then, ghostly ribbons of light unfolding over the dark. Not from a sun, but from deeper, invisible processes. Even lightning might be possible, under the right conditions. A storm hidden inside permanent night. A brief electric branching, revealing clouds that the sun will never touch. These possibilities matter, because they remind us that a world without a star is not necessarily a world without atmosphere, without motion, without visual drama. It is simply a world whose beauty has changed form. A world no longer illuminated from above. A world whose sky belongs mostly to distance. There is also the horizon itself. On Earth, the horizon is one of the places where hope lives. We expect brightness there. We expect arrival. On a rogue planet, the horizon may become something else. A boundary that never opens. A line that never promises anything beyond more darkness. And yet perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. Because it would force the mind to stop waiting, to stop listening for morning, to accept the world as it is. A place where starlight is not a temporary decoration of night, but the main language of the sky. That is why the visual life of a rogue planet is not simple. It is not merely blackness. It is a sky transformed, a sky emptied of one light, and filled more completely by all the others. A sky where distance becomes visible, where the galaxy becomes almost overwhelming, where darkness stops meaning pause and starts meaning permanence. And beneath that sky, the planet continues, still turning, still cooling, still carrying whatever remains below its frozen surface. Still silent, perhaps, but not absent. In the next part, we will look downward from that sky, toward the surface itself, toward the frozen plains, the collapsing atmosphere, the buried heat, and the strange question of what a sunless world becomes once the long cold begins. Now we look down, away from the sky, away from the stars, away from the endless black above, and toward the surface. Because once the sun is gone, the most important question is no longer what the world sees, but what the world becomes. A rogue planet does not turn strange all at once. It changes in layers, slowly, quietly, from the outside inward. At first, the surface would still remember the star. Stone holds heat for a while. Water resists change for a while. Air continues to move for a while. Clouds may still drift. Winds may still travel. Oceans may still shift under the last fading pattern of a former climate. For a little time, the world would carry the momentum of its old life. But momentum is not renewal, and nothing new would be arriving from the sky. No new sunlight, no daily reheating, no bright energy crossing the atmosphere to restart the familiar surface cycle. Only loss, not dramatic loss at first, not cinematic destruction, just a steady subtraction. And subtraction, given enough time, can rewrite an entire planet. The first great transformation would be temperature, because sunlight does much more than brighten a world. It powers the upper atmosphere, warms land and sea, creates differences in temperature, and those differences become motion, wind, weather, evaporation, rain, storms, seasons. Remove the sun, and the engine begins to fail. Surface temperatures fall. Day and night stop mattering, because there is no day left to contrast with night. Warm regions fade. Cold regions spread. The surface starts to flatten into one long thermal descent. At first, you might still find traces of the old world, a shoreline not yet fully frozen, rock still releasing the heat of earlier ages, air still circulating in weakened patterns. But the trend would be irreversible, and eventually, the ocean would begin to close. Not vanish, close. A skin of ice would form across its surface, then thicken again. And this matters deeply, because ice is strange. Ice is not only an ending, it is also a shield. The upper ocean may freeze first, because that is the part exposed to the loss. But deep below, water can remain different from the world above it. Dark, compressed, cut off, but not always solid. That possibility will matter later. For now, stay at the surface. Imagine coastlines caught in the last stages of change, waves slowing, then stiffening, then disappearing under advancing shelves of ice. Imagine plains where snow no longer melts, mountains where frost never retreats, valleys where the atmosphere itself grows thin and reluctant. The world would not explode into silence. It would cool into it. That is the right way to feel this transformation. Not a sudden death. A long surrender of surface motion. And the atmosphere would be part of that story too. Because atmospheres are not guaranteed to stay where they are. They depend on temperature, chemistry, gravity, pressure. If a rogue planet were Earth-like and lost its sunlight, much of its atmosphere could eventually begin to collapse. Not disappear into space all at once, but freeze onto the surface. Gases that remain airborne in warmth can condense in deep cold. They can settle, crystallize, collect. A sky can slowly become frost. That is one of the most haunting possibilities. Not just frozen oceans, but a frozen atmosphere. Air itself becoming part of the ground, the world above thinning, while the world below hardens. And that would change more than visibility. It would change sound, pressure, movement. If the air grows thinner, winds weaken, weather becomes rarer. The entire surface starts to feel more exposed to vacuum, more naked beneath the stars. On some rogue planets, especially those with lower gravity or less atmospheric mass to begin with, the outer world might become brutally dry and exposed. A landscape of ice, stone, and almost no breathing sky between surface and space. But not all rogue planets would follow the same path. That is important, because worlds differ. A large planet with a thick atmosphere, or a strong interior heat source, might hold on to more of its gases. A massive hydrogen-rich atmosphere, for example, could act almost like insulation. It could trap geothermal heat, slow the rate of freezing, and make the surface or deep subsurface less extreme than the phrase "no sun" would suggest. So even here, there is no single rogue planet story. Only families of possibilities. Some worlds become harsh and exposed. Some become sealed beneath immense atmospheres. Some freeze rapidly at the surface, while hiding a very different state below. And beneath all of them, another story continues. The story of internal heat. Because planets are not warm only because of stars, they also carry heat from within. Heat left over from formation. Heat generated by compression. Heat released through radioactive decay. Heat stored in deep rock and metal over immense spans of time. On Earth, we live mostly by sunlight, but Earth is not cold inside. Far below the crust, the planet is still active, still moving, still hot. And a rogue planet does not lose that internal heat the moment it loses its sun. It carries that heat with it. Buried, reduced over time, but still real. That changes everything. Because if the surface freezes, but internal heat continues to rise from below, then the world stops being simple. It stops being only dead surface and empty space. It becomes layered. Above, ice. Below, pressure. Below that, darkness and trapped heat. And perhaps, if the conditions are right, liquid water. This is one of the most beautiful turns in the entire story. A world with no sunrise may still hold an ocean. Not under open sky, not with waves reflecting daylight, but under miles of frozen silence, hidden from the stars, but not gone. Think about what that means. A planet wandering in interstellar darkness, its mountains frozen, its horizon black, its atmosphere thinned or transformed, and deep below all of that, water still moving slowly, still touching stone, still holding chemistry in motion. It would be an ocean without weather, an ocean without moonlight, an ocean without dawn, and yet still an ocean. That is why the surface of a rogue planet cannot be read too quickly. From above, it might look finished, a frozen sphere, dim and severe. But surfaces can mislead, especially in astronomy. A calm exterior often hides a more complicated interior, and a rogue planet may be one of the purest examples of that truth. The upper world grows colder, more rigid, less expressive, but that very rigidity may help seal warmth below. Ice, once thick enough, insulates surprisingly well. The deeper layers beneath it are protected from direct loss to space. So the same freezing that appears to end the ocean from above may help preserve part of it below. A hard shell forming over a hidden persistence. There is something emotionally powerful in that. A planet whose visible story becomes silence, while its invisible story continues. If you walked across such a frozen surface, again assuming survival were somehow possible, you might feel almost nothing moving. No open water, no rain, no ordinary wind, no visible signs of the planet's deeper memory. Only an immense plain of ice or frozen stone, extending into darkness, perhaps cracked in places, perhaps ridged and folded by slow internal stress, perhaps marked by ancient fractures where the shell above has shifted over time, but mostly still, mostly closed. And yet every step would be over a world not entirely finished. That is the feeling Part 4 needs to leave behind. Not just cold, contained cold. not just stillness, layered stillness, because a rogue planet's surface is the record of a transition, a record of losing external warmth and reorganizing around what remains. Some regions might freeze into astonishing forms, sheets of nitrogen ice, if the chemistry allowed it, carbon dioxide frost, water ice harder than rock at those temperatures. The ground itself might behave differently under intense cold, more brittle in some places, more glass-like in others. Old geological activity could become frozen in place. Landscapes arrested mid-story, features that on a warmer world would erode, collapse, flow, or soften, now preserved. A planet turned into archive, and if the atmosphere survives in some form, even weakly, it may continue to move over the frozen landscape. Thin winds crossing black plains, lifting powder-fine frost, reshaping drifts over centuries rather than days. Perhaps rare clouds, not rich weather systems like Earth, but faint condensations, brief veils in a sky that never brightens. The rhythm of the surface would become almost incomprehensibly slow. What changes in a day on Earth might take years there. What changes in a season here might take ages there. The whole visible world would move at the speed of persistence. That slowness is not empty. It is part of the beauty. A rogue planet's surface is beautiful, not because it is lively in the human sense, but because everything there has been reduced to essentials: rock, ice, pressure, darkness, residual heat. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. Only the long physical truth of a world adapting to exile. And perhaps that is why such landscapes feel so difficult to forget. They are not simply alien, they are disciplined. The star is gone, and so the planet becomes severe. Its surface stripped down to what can survive without dawn. That does not mean every rogue planet would look the same. A small rocky rogue planet might become an exposed frozen desert. A larger water-rich world might grow a vast global ice shell. A mini Neptune or sub-Neptune with a thick atmosphere might retain deep warmth and pressure in ways far stranger than Earth-like intuition would expect. There may be rogue worlds with crusts of ice above buried oceans, rogue worlds with dense gas envelopes above superheated lower layers, rogue worlds so cold at the top and yet so insulated below that their visible face tells only a fraction of the truth. So when we ask, what happens to the surface? The answer is not one image. It is a progression, a cooling, a hardening, a thinning or collapse of atmosphere in some cases, a freezing over of oceans, a preservation of internal warmth, and the creation of a split world, one world above, another below. That split may be the most important physical idea in this entire video, because it rescues the rogue planet from being imagined as only a dead object. A rogue planet may become two planets at once, a silent outer shell and a hidden inner environment, one visible, one buried, one ruled by starlight no longer present, and one ruled by the heat a planet still remembers from within. That is the beginning of a very different kind of world, not an Earth copy in darkness, not a simple frozen ball, but a layered exile, a place where the upper surface records loss, and the deep interior records endurance. In the next part, we go deeper into that hidden endurance, below the ice, below the collapsing sky, below the frozen memory of oceans and weather. We ask the most delicate question in the story. Could anything survive there? Could chemistry continue? Could liquid water remain? Could a world with no sun still hold the conditions for life? Because once the surface closes, the real mystery moves underground. And now, we come to the farthest edge of the story. beyond the orbit, beyond the ejection, beyond the frozen surface, beyond the hidden ocean, we come to the meaning of a world like this. Because a rogue planet is not only a scientific object, it is also a change in perspective, a quiet correction to the way we imagine the universe. Most people picture the cosmos through its lights, stars, galaxies, nebulae, bright centers, burning things. We are naturally drawn to what shines. We map the universe by what announces itself, by what can be seen from far away. But rogue planets suggest another universe exists alongside that one. A darker universe, a quieter universe, a universe of hidden worlds, moving between the stars. Worlds without dawn, without orbit, without any easy way to be noticed, and yet still fully real, still carrying mass, history, chemistry, buried heat, perhaps even buried water. That idea changes the emotional scale of space, because it means the universe may not be made only of luminous destinations. It may also be full of silent passages, not just stars and the planets that cling to them, but exiled worlds, wandering through the cold between systems. Some of them perhaps once warm, some perhaps never warm at all, some frozen on the surface, some still layered with hidden interior activity, some visible only by accident, some maybe never seen. There is something almost overwhelming in that possibility, not because it is violent, but because it is vast. It suggests that the galaxy may contain countless worlds that belong nowhere obvious, countless horizons that never brighten, countless mountains that have not known a sunrise in ages beyond imagination, countless frozen seas, and perhaps a few buried ones, all drifting through distances so large that ordinary human ideas of loneliness begin to fail. And yet, rogue planets are not simply symbols of emptiness. That would make them too simple. They are symbols of continuation, of a world that keeps existing after losing the thing around which it was organized. That may be why they feel so strangely moving, because they force us to separate existence from visibility. A world does not stop being real because no one sees it. A world does not stop having structure because it gives off no light. A world does not stop carrying history because it is passed beyond easy notice. In that sense, rogue planets are almost philosophical objects. They remind us that hidden things can still be complete things, that silence is not the same as absence, that darkness does not always mean nothing remains. Sometimes, it means the story has moved somewhere deeper, into buried heat, into sealed oceans, into forms of persistence no sunrise is needed to sustain. There is something very gentle in that thought, not comforting in an easy way. These worlds are severe. Their surfaces may be mercilessly cold, their skies too open, their horizons too final. And yet the idea that they continue, that they endure in altered form, gives them a strange kind of dignity. Not thriving in the way Earth thrives, not bright, not flourishing in any familiar sense, but still carrying themselves through the dark, still being worlds. That may be the most important emotional truth in the whole video. A rogue planet is not merely a world that lost its sun. It is a world that became something else, a colder form of planet, a quieter form of planet, a planet reorganized around what remained. And perhaps that is why it lingers in the mind, because all through this story, the same pattern has returned: loss, and then persistence, exile, and then adaptation, silence, and then hidden complexity. First the orbit breaks, Then the sky changes. Then the surface closes. Then the deeper layers begin to matter. At every stage, what looks like an ending becomes a transformation. That does not make rogue planets gentle places, but it makes them profound ones. They belong to one of the oldest truths in science. Reality is usually stranger and more layered than first impressions allow. A frozen world in darkness sounds simple until you look closer. Then it becomes a place with atmospheric collapse, ice insulation, internal heat, buried oceans, chemical possibility. A lost world becomes a hidden world, and a hidden world becomes a question. How many are out there? How many horizons never brighten? How many black skies hold the Milky Way above a frozen plain? How many silent planets move through interstellar darkness? Unknown, unlit, and unimaginably old. We may never know all of them. Perhaps we will detect some, through brief gravitational lensing, through faint heat signatures, through the small betrayals they offer to careful instruments. But many may remain beyond us. They may pass through the galaxy with almost no witness, too dark to call attention to themselves, too distant to become familiar. That also changes the feeling of astronomy. It means discovery is not only about what the universe displays, it is also about what it conceals. Not only what burns, but what drifts. Not only what announces itself in light, but what persists in darkness. That is why rogue planets feel like the perfect beginning, because they sit exactly at the center of this channel's promise. Hidden worlds, strange science, told softly, for sleep. A world with no sun is not loud. It does not demand attention through violence. It asks for a slower kind of imagination, a quieter kind of curiosity, the willingness to stay with darkness long enough for detail to emerge inside it. And maybe that is the final lesson of a rogue planet, that what seems empty from a distance may be full of structure. What seems finished may be enduring. What seems lost may simply be continuing beyond the range of ordinary light. If you return now, in your mind, to the image from the beginning, a lone planet in interstellar darkness, no sunrise, no warm horizon, no star to orbit. That image should feel different now, not simpler, but deeper. You know now that the darkness is not only visual, it is climatic, atmospheric, geological, emotional. You know that the frozen surface may hide an ocean, that the missing sunrise changes not only the sky, but the whole rhythm of existence. That the world may have been exiled by gravity, or born alone in the dark. That it may be only one among many. And perhaps most importantly, you know that it is still a world, not a failed one, not an empty one, a severe one, a hidden one, a transformed one, still moving through the galaxy, still carrying the slow memory of its making, still passing beneath stars that will never warm it. There is something unforgettable in that. A planet without morning, a horizon that never prepares for light, an ocean perhaps still breathing in darkness below miles of ice, a world cut off from every ordinary sign of home, and yet still refusing, in its own quiet way, to disappear. Some worlds end in fire, some end in collision, and some, perhaps the strangest of all, continue in distance, slowly, silently, between the stars. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, keep that world in mind. A dark planet under a sky full of suns, a frozen surface, a hidden sea, a long exile. And somewhere beyond everything familiar, Perhaps many such worlds are drifting now, unseen, unheard, and very real. This is Gentle Science. Thank you for exploring hidden worlds softly for sleep. Good night. And now we move below the ice, below the frozen plains, below the dark horizon, below the silent surface that seems to say, nothing could remain here. Because this is the most delicate question in the story. Once a planet loses its sun, once the surface hardens, once the atmosphere thins or freezes, once the visible world becomes still, is that the end? Or is something still continuing, out of sight? This is where rogue planets become more than lonely objects. This is where they become truly mysterious. Because if all warmth came only from the star above, then the answer would be simple. But planets do not live by sunlight alone. They also carry heat from within. And internal heat, even when it is faint compared with a sun, can matter enormously over long spans of time. Deep inside a planet, heat lingers. Some of it is leftover heat from formation, stored from the violence of accretion, from impacts, from compression, from the ancient making of the world itself. Some of it comes from radioactive decay, slowly releasing energy from elements buried in rock. Some of it may come from tidal effects, if the rogue planet still has moons, or once had a gravitational history that left its interior active. Whatever the source, the result is the same. The inside of a planet can remain warmer for far longer than the surface suggests. And that changes the question completely. Because once a thick shell of ice forms above an ocean, the surface no longer tells the whole truth. A world can look dead from above and still remain chemically active below. This is already something we understand from our own solar system. Even worlds far from the sun, cold worlds, dark worlds, have shown us that ice is not always the end of water. Sometimes it is the roof over it. That is one of the most beautiful reversals in planetary science. The thing that appears to seal a world shut may also help preserve what lies beneath. Because thick ice does more than freeze. It insulates. It slows the escape of heat from below. It creates a barrier between the buried ocean and the vacuum of space. And once that barrier becomes thick enough, a hidden sea can survive much longer than instinct expects. Not open to the sky, not bright, not stirred by weather or moonlight in the familiar way, but still liquid, still touching stone, still holding dissolved minerals, temperature gradients, pressure, and chemistry in motion. That matters because life, as far as we understand it, does not require sunlight in every case. Sunlight powers the surface ecosystems of Earth. But deep on our own planet, life exists in places where sunlight never enters. Around hydrothermal systems, deep below rock, in chemical environments built not on daylight, but on stored energy and mineral interaction. So when we ask whether a rogue planet could still hold the conditions for life, we are not asking a fantasy question. We are extending a real scientific idea into a more extreme setting. Could liquid water remain? Could the ocean floor still exchange heat and chemicals with the water above it? Could gradients still exist, gentle but sufficient, to keep chemistry from going still? Could a buried sea continue for millions or even billions of years? The answer is not easy, and it is not one answer. It depends on the planet, its size, its composition, its age, how much water it began with, how fast it loses heat, how thick the ice becomes, what kind of atmosphere it retains, whether internal activity continues, whether the deep ocean remains in contact with reactive rock. But the important thing is this: the idea is not absurd. A rogue planet does not have to be imagined as a perfect tomb. In some cases, it may be better imagined as a sealed world, an inner ocean hidden inside a frozen shell, a dark environment, yes, a harsh one, yes, but not necessarily a finished one. And that difference is everything, because once you allow for a hidden ocean, you allow for time. And time is one of the great makers of possibility. A buried ocean does not need to be comfortable. It does not need waves under sunlight, or shallow reefs, or bright open water. It only needs persistence, liquid water, energy, chemistry, and enough stability for long processes to continue. That is a much quieter definition of habitability, and perhaps a more profound one. It shifts the idea of life away from familiar landscapes, away from blue skies and warm shores, towards something more patient, more hidden, more difficult to notice. Imagine an ocean under miles of ice. No sunrise ever reaches it. No star is visible from its surface. No weather crosses overhead. No seasons turn. The world above is black, frozen, sealed, and yet below, water still moves slowly in the dark. Minerals dissolve. Heat rises through rock. Chemical gradients persist. Perhaps vents release energy from the interior. Perhaps fractures in the crust allow circulation. Perhaps whole ecosystems, if ecosystems are the right word, could exist in forms far stranger than anything easily imagined from the surface of Earth. Not forests, not fish in open water, not the visible abundance humans instinctively associate with life. Something quieter, smaller, slower, but still alive. That possibility gives rogue planets a different emotional weight. They stop being only symbols of loss. They become symbols of hidden endurance. Worlds abandoned by sunlight, but not abandoned by physics. Worlds in which the surface closes, and the real story goes underground. There is something deeply moving about that, because a rogue planet may be one of the most extreme examples of a truth we already know. Surface appearance is not the whole world. What looks silent may not be empty. What looks finished may still be continuing. And a planet with no morning may still hold a place where chemistry never fully went to sleep. Of course, we have to be careful. This is not certainty. It is possibility. A scientifically serious possibility, but still a possibility. Some rogue planets may cool too far, too fast. Some may lose too much internal heat. Some may form ice shells so thick and deep environments so isolated that long-term habitability becomes very difficult. Some may never have enough water to begin with. Some may be more like frozen stone deserts, with almost no hidden interior refuge at all. And even when liquid water survives, life does not automatically follow. Water is not a guarantee. Energy is not a guarantee. Chemistry is not a guarantee. Life may still require a chain of unlikely steps. But rogue planets remind us of something important. The universe does not always place possibility where human intuition expects it. We expect life near stars, near warmth, light, visible energy, and often that expectation is right, but perhaps not always. Perhaps some of the most persistent habitats, if they exist at all, are not in bright systems easy to admire from far away, but in sealed, dark worlds carrying a small inheritance of internal heat through interstellar space. That idea changes the emotional architecture of the cosmos. It suggests that life, or at least habitability, may not belong only to illuminated places, that a world can lose the sky and still keep an interior, lose the dawn and still keep a sea, lose the star and still keep the conditions for something patient to continue. There is almost a kind of tenderness in that, not softness. These worlds are severe, but tenderness in the scientific sense. A recognition that existence is harder to extinguish than it first appears. That under enough ice, with enough time, with enough hidden heat, a planet may protect more of itself than the surface reveals. If you stood on such a rogue planet, again imagining survival only for the sake of thought, you would see almost nothing of this. You would walk over frozen plains, black ridges, silent fields of ice, under stars that do not warm you. The visible world would tell a story of endings, but below your feet, perhaps very far below, water might still be touching stone, heat might still be rising, chemistry might still be threading its slow paths through darkness. The real life of the planet, if that word applies, would no longer be written at the surface. It would be hidden in depth, a buried world, inside a buried world. That is why rogue planets feel so memorable, not just because they are lonely, but because they refuse to be simple. At every step, they become stranger. First, they are worlds with no sun, then worlds with no sunrise, then frozen surfaces, then hidden oceans, then the possibility, however uncertain, that exile did not end everything, that maybe the deepest part of the planet continued in secrecy. There is something almost mythic about that, a dark, wandering world, apparently lost, and yet carrying an unseen sea in its interior, a place where the visible story says silence, and the invisible story says not yet. In the next part, we move toward the farthest emotional edge of this idea, beyond the mechanics, beyond the ice, beyond the scientific possibility of survival. We ask what it means for the universe itself to contain worlds like this, worlds with no sun, no dawn, perhaps no witness, and yet still drifting, still holding their hidden histories through the cold between the stars.